My husband humiliated me at the polo ground, introducing his girlfriend as his future wife. When I confronted him, his rage turned violent. He tied me behind a horse, leaving me injured and helpless. A stranger saved me just in time. But the very next day, I returned, not as a victim, but with a revenge so terrifying he never saw it coming. My name is Sophia, and if someone had told me that my life would take such a dramatic turn, I might have laughed. I used to believe I had it all: my passion for polo, a supportive community, and a husband who seemed to understand me. At least, that's what I thought. Growing up in a suburban area known for its vibrant polo grounds, I fell in love with the sport at a young age. Polo wasn't just a game to me, it was my sanctuary, my passion, and the place where I truly felt alive. By my late 20s, I was recognized as one of the most skilled players in our community. It wasn't easy juggling a competitive sport in a small town, but the joy I felt on the field made every challenge worthwhile. When I met Ethan, I thought I'd found someone who admired my strength and independence. Ethan was older than me, in his mid-30s, and his confidence had a way of making you believe in him. He said all the right things, praising my talent and encouraging my dreams, or so it seemed at first. Ethan was charming, and I was smitten. He made me feel like I could trust him, like he'd be my partner in all things. Little did I know that trust would be shattered. Even after our marriage, I continued to pursue my passion for polo. I remember how he'd occasionally show up at matches, watching me play with a detached sort of interest. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of pride in his eyes, but more often than not, it felt like he was just waiting. For what I didn't know, at home, Ethan's charm began to wear thin. He'd criticize my focus on the sport, telling me I was wasting my time chasing a childish hobby. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself that he didn't mean it, that maybe he was just having a bad day. But the comments became sharper and more frequent. "Sophia, don't you think it's time to grow up?" he'd say, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're not some teenager chasing dreams." I didn't understand why he was so dismissive. He'd married a polo player, he knew who I was. But I stayed quiet, thinking I could balance both worlds, my love for the game and my marriage. It was a delicate line to walk, and I tried so hard not to falter. One bright afternoon, everything changed. I'd just finished a practice session at the polo grounds, feeling the usual rush of satisfaction after a good game. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and I was chatting with a few teammates when Ethan arrived. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a young woman, elegant and composed, dressed in expensive clothes that screamed wealth and status. She was strikingly beautiful, the kind of beauty that turned heads wherever she went. Ethan didn't waste any time with pleasantries. Instead, he smiled, a smug, self-satisfied smile, and said, "Sophia, meet Olivia, my future wife." For a moment, I thought it was a cruel joke. My heart raced, and my mouth went dry as I stared at him, trying to process his words.
"What?"
I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "You heard me," he said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "Olivia and I are getting married. She's everything you're not, sophisticated, wealthy, and worth my time." I was frozen, too shocked to respond. The people around us had fallen silent, their eyes darting between us. Ethan's words hit me like a punch to the gut. "How dare you?" I finally said, my voice breaking. He didn't flinch. "Oh, spare me the drama, Sophia. You're just a cheap girl wasting your time with silly games. Olivia is the kind of woman who can actually make a difference in my life." His cruelty was like a dagger, cutting deep and leaving me gasping for air. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly devastated. This was the man I had trusted, the man I had believed in. And here he was, parading his betrayal in front of everyone. I turned to Olivia, searching for some sign of guilt or remorse, but her expression was unreadable. She didn't say a word, just stood there, looking almost detached. I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. "You're disgusting," I said to Ethan, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "You think you can treat people like this and get away with it?" His response was a cold laugh. Oh, Sophia. Grow up. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But instead, I walked away, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I felt utterly alone. Ethan had shattered my trust, my dignity, and everything I thought I knew about him. But as much as his betrayal hurt, something inside me refused to give up. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to find a way to rise above the pain he had inflicted on me. Looking back, I realized the day was just the beginning. What followed would test me in ways I could never have imagined, pushing me to my limits and forcing me to uncover a strength I didn't know I had. The hours after that humiliating encounter with Ethan were a blur of disbelief and heartbreak. I felt like I was drowning in emotions I couldn't process: anger, sorrow, confusion, and most of all, a sense of betrayal so deep it left me breathless. I couldn't understand how someone I had loved, someone I thought loved me, could treat me with such cruelty. I spent the night replaying his words in my mind, each one cutting like a knife. The next morning, I decided to confront Ethan. I couldn't let this go unanswered. He owed me an explanation, if not for his sake, then for mine. I found him in the living room, casually scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," I said firmly, though my voice wavered slightly. He didn't even look up. "About what?" he asked, his tone indifferent. "About what happened yesterday. About Olivia. About you introducing her as your future wife, while I'm still your wife. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for me?" He finally put his phone down and looked at me, his expression cold. "Humiliating for you? Sophia, let's not make this about feelings. I'm being honest with you. Isn't that what you always wanted? Honesties? Honesties?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You call flaunting another woman in front of me honesty? You've been lying to me, Ethan, and now you want to act like you're doing me a favor?" He stood up, towering over me with an intimidating presence I hadn't noticed before. "You don't get it, do you? Olivia is my future. She comes from wealth, from power. She's someone who can actually elevate my life, not hold me back like you do." "Hold you back?" I said, incredulous. "I've supported you in every way I could, Ethan. I've worked hard to keep this marriage together despite your constant criticism and belittling of my passion. And now you're blaming me for holding you back." He rolled his eyes. "Spare me the speech, Sophia. You're nothing more than a cheap girl wasting her time on a silly game. You think polo is going to make you important? It's laughable." Those words broke something inside me. All the years of self-doubt he'd planted in me, all the times I had second-guessed myself because of his disdain, came rushing to the surface. "I don't care what you think about polo, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "But you don't get to decide my worth. And you certainly don't get to treat me like I'm disposable." That's when his demeanor shifted. His indifference turned to rage, and before I knew it, he grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the door. "You want to see how disposable you are?" he hissed. "Let me show you." I struggled against his grip, but Ethan was strong, and his anger made him even more forceful. He dragged me outside, toward the polo ground where I had spent so many happy hours. It was empty now, eerily silent except for the sound of my protests and his heavy breathing. "Ethan, stop. What are you doing?" I pleaded, panic rising in my chest. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a length of rope from the equipment shed and tied me to one of the practice poles. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Ethan, this is insane. Let me go." But he wasn't listening. He mounted his horse, his eyes dark with fury. "You think you're so tough, Sophia? Let's see how tough you are when you're lying there helpless." And then he did something I'll never forget. He rode his horse dangerously close to me, circling around at a terrifying speed. Each pass was closer than the last, the horse's hooves kicking up dust and rocks that hit my face and arms. The fear was suffocating. I could barely breathe, my screams drowned out by the sound of the galloping horse. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. How could someone I had once loved turn into this monster? Every time I cried out, hoping he'd stop, he seemed to grow more exhilarated. It was like he fed off my fear. And then suddenly it stopped. I didn't know why at first. My vision was blurred with tears, and I was too terrified to make sense of what was happening. But when I opened my eyes, I saw Olivia standing a few feet away, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell is wrong with you, Ethan?" she shouted, her voice trembling. "Stay out of this, Olivia," Ethan barked. "This is between me and my wife." But Olivia didn't back down. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "You're insane," she said, her voice steadier now. "If you don't stop this right now, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are." Ethan hesitated, glaring at her. For a moment, I thought he might lash out at her too. But then, as if realizing he couldn't win this fight, he dismounted and stormed away, leaving me tied and sobbing on the ground. Olivia rushed to me, her hands shaking as she untied the ropes. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. I couldn't answer. I was too overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. But in that moment, I realized something. Olivia wasn't my enemy. She had seen the monster Ethan truly was, and for reasons I couldn't yet understand, she had chosen to help me. When Olivia untied me and helped me to my feet, I was too shaken to fully grasp the weight of what had just happened. My body ached from the bruises, but it was the betrayal that hurt the most. Ethan wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. As I leaned against Olivia for support, I couldn't understand why she had stepped in. After all, wasn't she the woman Ethan had so brazenly declared his future wife? "Let's get you to the hospital," Olivia said softly, her tone kind but urgent. She wrapped her arm around me and led me toward her car, ignoring the cloud of dust that still lingered in the air. I wanted to resist. I wanted to tell her I didn't need her help, that I could handle this on my own. But the truth was I couldn't. I was too battered and broken, physically and emotionally, to push her away. So, I let her guide me, every step feeling heavier than the last. The drive to the hospital was quiet, except for Olivia occasionally asking if I was okay. I didn't know what to say. How could I be okay after what Ethan had done? After what he had revealed himself to be? My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions I couldn't answer, and emotions I couldn't contain. But one question burned brighter than the rest. Why had Olivia stepped in? At the hospital, the staff immediately took me in, treating the cuts and bruises Ethan's cruelty had left behind. Olivia stayed with me the entire time, sitting quietly in the corner of the room as the nurses worked. She didn't look like the poised, confident woman Ethan had introduced at the polo ground. Instead, she looked shaken, as though the events of the day had unsettled her as much as they had broken me. When the nurse left us alone, Olivia finally spoke. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," she said, her voice trembling. "I had no idea Ethan was capable of something like that." I looked at her, unsure how to respond. Was this sympathy genuine, or was it just guilt? "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "You're the one he's planning to marry. How could you not know who he really is?" Olivia sighed and looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. "I don't know what I was thinking. Ethan, he's charming, persuasive. He made me believe in this image of himself that isn't real. I thought I knew him, but after today," she paused, shaking her head. "I can't believe I ever trusted him." I wanted to tell her that she should have seen it sooner, that she should have known better. But the truth was, I had fallen for the same charm, the same lies. Ethan had fooled both of us. "What he did to you today," Olivia continued, her voice breaking, "was horrifying. I can't stand by and let him get away with it." Her words took me by surprise. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to help you," she said firmly. "Ethan needs to face the consequences of what he's done. To you, to me, to anyone who's been caught in his web." I stared at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Was she serious? Could I trust her? But as I looked into her eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Guilt, remorse, and a determination that mirrored my own. "Why would you do that?" I asked cautiously. "After everything." "Because what he did was wrong," Olivia said, her voice unwavering now. "And because I can't marry someone like that." I won't. Today, I saw who he really is, and I don't want any part of it. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time since Ethan's betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fight back. Over the next few days, Olivia and I began working together. She showed me the video she had recorded of Ethan's violent outburst, a chilling reminder of his cruelty. "This is evidence," she said, her tone determined. "We can use this to bring him to justice." It wasn't easy. Every step of the process felt like reopening the wounds Ethan had left behind. But Olivia's support gave me strength. She wasn't just apologizing for her role in my pain. She was actively trying to make things right. We went to the authorities, presenting the video and recounting the events of that awful day. The officers were appalled, and their response was swift. A case was opened against Ethan, charging him with assault, abuse, and endangerment. As the legal wheels began to turn, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks: empowerment. For so long, I had let Ethan's words and actions define me, but now, I was taking control. With Olivia by my side, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. It was ironic, really. The woman Ethan had brought into my life to replace me was now the one helping me expose him. Olivia and I were an unlikely team, but together, we were stronger than I ever imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, and the battle was far from over. But for the first time, I felt like justice was within reach. And this time, I wasn't fighting alone. The days leading up to the trial were some of the most difficult of my life. Reliving the trauma of Ethan's betrayal and abuse was like ripping open a wound that had barely begun to heal. But I knew I couldn't give up. Ethan needed to face the consequences of what he had done, not just for me but for every person he had hurt or manipulated. And with Olivia by my side, I felt stronger. Olivia surprised me in more ways than I can count. She didn't just stand by me, she fought alongside me. She was relentless in gathering evidence against Ethan, digging through old messages, emails, and anything that might prove his pattern of deceit and abuse. She even connected with others who had crossed paths with Ethan and had similar stories of his manipulation. It was as though once the veil of his charm had been lifted, the truth became glaringly obvious. When the trial began, I was terrified. Ethan was still the man I had once loved, and part of me dreaded seeing him again. But as I sat in that courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, reporters, and strangers, I reminded myself why I was there. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about reclaiming my future. Ethan walked into the courtroom with the same smug confidence I had once found so captivating. He didn't even glance in my direction. His arrogance was infuriating, but it also strengthened my resolve. He truly believed he was untouchable. He thought he could continue to manipulate and abuse without facing any consequences. But not this time. The prosecution presented the video Olivia had recorded, a stark and undeniable piece of evidence. Watching it play out on the screen was harrowing. Seeing myself tied up, crying out for help as Ethan's horse circled dangerously close, was like reliving the nightmare all over again. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my voice in the video, raw and filled with fear. I glanced at Ethan, hoping to see some sign of remorse, but there was none. He sat there, his face expressionless, as though the events in the video were happening to someone else. But the jury's reaction was clear. Their faces were a mix of shock and disgust, and for the first time, I felt like justice might actually be possible. When it was my turn to testify, my hands trembled as I took the stand. I spoke about the person Ethan had pretended to be, the man I thought I had married, and how that illusion had shattered over time. I described his growing disdain for me, his cruel words, and the terrifying day when he had taken his anger to a horrifying level. I also spoke about Olivia, how she had stepped in when no one else did, how she had risked her own safety to stop Ethan and bring him to justice. She could have walked away, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling inside me. But she chose to do the right thing. And, because of her, I'm standing here today. Olivia testified too. Her words were powerful, painting a picture of the man Ethan truly was, a manipulative, abusive individual who cared for no one but himself. She recounted how she had believed his lies, how she had fallen for his charm, and how her perception of him had shattered when she saw his true nature. "I was horrified," she said, her voice breaking. "But I knew I couldn't stay silent. What he did to Sophia was monstrous, and he needs to be held accountable." Ethan's defense tried to discredit us, painting me as a bitter wife clinging to her anger and Olivia as a jilted lover seeking revenge. But the evidence spoke louder than their words. The video, the testimonies, the corroborating accounts from others who had experienced Ethan's manipulations, it all painted a damning picture. When the verdict was finally read, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the judge's words. But then I heard them clearly. Guilty. Ethan was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for assault, abuse, and endangerment. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. For so long, I had felt powerless against him, but now, justice had been served. He couldn't hurt anyone else. Not anymore. After the trial, Olivia and I stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting. "Thank you," I said to her, my voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how I would have done this without you." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We did it together, Sophia. You're stronger than you think." Looking back, I realized she was right. The journey hadn't just been about holding Ethan accountable. It had been about rediscovering my own strength. I wasn't the same woman who had let Ethan's words and actions define her. I had fought back, found my voice, and reclaimed my life. The scars he left would always be a part of me, but they didn't define me. What defined me was the courage to stand up, the resilience to keep going, and the support of an unexpected ally who reminded me that justice is worth fighting for. As I walked away from the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Ethan's chapter in my life was finally closed, and for the first time, I was ready to write my own story.